Tēnā koutou. Welcome everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today. Lovely to see you, Cam, by the way. On behalf of Inside Recruitment, On-Site Recruitment, Weirdly, and Inside Consulting, we wish you a huge thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting us for the year that we've had thus far. And we're really super pleased to have Cameron coming to you to bring you some really clear updates out of yesterday's budget announcement. Before we get to that, I just wanted to, I suppose I should introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Troy Turner, Managing Partner across those different businesses. You might know people like Matt sitting in consulting, or Shelley in policy, or you might know Steph in business transformation, Charlotte in HR, or Dale Clarebert sitting in Weirdly and On-Site. So, on behalf of the whole team, we want to say thank you. For some of you, you might be sitting there as people leaders, hiring managers. For some, you might be sitting there as business owners. Some of you, you might be sitting there as candidates or employees. We're really hopeful that today will be useful to you all in some way, shape, or form. It has been a really difficult period, we know, and what I'm hoping to do today is to bring you some, what I've themed as my year at least, some reality, some realistic information that you can look forward with and understand, how you might be able to control what you can control. So in saying that, a big part of what we're trying to do here at Inside is to help enable people and organizations to thrive with purpose. And we really feel like bringing you insights like this, having access to someone like Cam, who I'll outline in a moment, enables you to do that. The more information you have at hand, the more realistic information you have at hand, the more you'll be able to do for yourself, for your whānau, and for your community. So quickly, I'm going to hand over to Cam shortly, and I'll do that. Just before I do that, I just want to tell you how today will work. Bit of an introduction from me, which will be done in about 1 minute. Then I'm going to pass over to Cam. Cam's got a presentation that he'll deliver for about 30 to 40 minutes, Cam. That feels about right?
Yep.
Great. And then we're going to have a Q&A. So what you'll be able to do is down below, sitting in that Zoom feature, you'll see Q&A down there. At the end, what we'll try and do is answer as many questions as we can. So if you do want to put a question down in the Q&A area, there will be some allocated time at the end, and hopefully enough time we'll get through a lot of questions. So we'll be able to kind of put those to Cam and sit there and answer those as best he can. And then lastly, for those of you who are wondering, geez, do I have to take all these notes, or how does it work? What happens if I go away to get a drink, or I need to go toilet? It will be recorded. So we'll put that into our kind of YouTube channel. We'll probably put it up on our page, and it'll definitely go back out to anyone who is registered as well. Just so if you miss something, it will come back to you. So introducing Cam. For those who don't know Cam, he is just an absolute great man to start with. I always start with that. He's a good person to really deal with. But secondly, he's got a lot of really awesome insights for us. So, well, I was going to say a 20-year background, but it's probably a wee bit more, Cam, as we slowly get growing.
Well, don't show my age too much.
No. So I'll say
20 years sounds good.
Yeah, I'll say 20. So 20 years, but ultimately, that's kind of been through Statistics New Zealand, Treasury, National Bank, and then ANZ, where he was the chief economist. Now, and I say almost thankfully now he's running Baggery Consulting, Baggery Economics, where he is providing independent analysis, economic information for organizations and for commentary. So, today what I'm hoping to give you, what I know you'll get, is a really clear view without the spin. It is really hard to kind of interpret not only the budget itself, but then the different commentators talking to the budget, the pros and the cons. So what I'm really confident you'll get today is a very clear, non-spun view of what got delivered yesterday and some of the other economic indicators around it. So, Cam, I'm going to pass over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Troy. So I'm just shifting to a different camera. I've got multiple screens up. Look, my characterization of yesterday, I started off earlier in the week, and I talked about it being the Peter versus Paul budget, because we saw a whole lot of pre-budget announcements, and we sort of knew who Peter or Pauline was, but we didn't know who was funding Peter or Pauline. And what we found out yesterday was, obviously the pay equity was a big funder. The government's got a big issue behind the scenes. They pulled a rabbit out of the hat yesterday. But if you look at the fiscal forecasts, they're going to need to pull multiple rabbits out of the hat over the next sort of few years. And I've just got a suspicion that those rabbits are going to become increasingly difficult to find unless you're prepared to jump into what's called, some of the real big areas. And one of the real big areas, which no one wants to talk about, we're going to have a discussion about in the second half of 2025, is going to be the affordability or the sustainability of New Zealand superannuation. We're going to need to have a national conversation about that. If you go back to 2020, New Zealand superannuation expenditure was roughly what we spent on education. If you look at New Zealand superannuation expenditure the upcoming year, we're going to be spending $3.2 billion more on the grey force, which comes at the expense of the future workforce. Outside of Bagger Economics, I sit on the board of Life Education New Zealand, and I've got a real bee in my bonnet about education, and you're going to see me rattling a few cages about that. So we'll get into it. I presume you can see the screen, Troy? Yeah. But just a little bit of economic context in regard to where we sit as an economy. I seem to recall about 12 months ago, I gave a bit of an update around this budget, and it wasn't exactly the most upbeat presentation I've ever given from memory, because I sort of said, 2023 was the appetizer on 2024, and 2024 was going to be pretty tough. And lo and behold, the middle of the year, look, when I gave that presentation, we were in the middle of the storm in regard to what was going on. The economy contracted a lot in the June quarter. The economy contracted again in the September quarter. The good news is that the economy has now found its footing. We've got growth. Now, just because you've got growth does not mean the good times immediately come back, because you need to think about the levels of activity, which basically means you need 2, 3, 4 quarters of positive growth before you get the level of activity that's sort of back into that comfort zone for business. So what we're seeing at the moment is that we're at an inflection point where we've turned the corner. We're starting to print some positive numbers, but the level of activity is still a bit stressful for the average business around New Zealand. And what we're still seeing, particularly in Wellington, is that the impact of the clampdown has not really started at the moment. What we're also seeing is, normally when you go through an economic recession, you improve a whole lot of structural indicators, and one structural indicator is your current account. And when you go through a recession, people spend less, the input bill drops, then the current account improves. And what that really means is that you put a little bit more ammunition back in the economy in the form of the ability to borrow and spend on the upswing stage of the cycle. What we've seen this time around is that the current account narrowed from a dreadful level, but it's still around 6.2% of GDP, which, in my mind, does not allow scope for New Zealand at the moment to really get into a bit of borrow and spend sort of stuff. So we're still going through what's called a little bit of paying the piper, both in regard to the external current account situation, but what we've also got, there's a huge overlay across New Zealand and what we call structural weakness. And I'll give you an example of structural weakness, because I'm the chair of Transport in New Zealand. So a whole lot of truck drivers. I flew into Christchurch Airport last week. It took me 2.5 hours to drive from Christchurch Airport to Timaru. That is 165 kilometres, and it took me 2.5 hours. And the reason it took me 2.5 hours was because of road conitis. There were road cones everywhere. And that's just like illustrating that infrastructure is holding New Zealand back. So school attendance. I've got to bear my bonnet about education reporting. The target for school attendance is 94% of kids at school every day. We're a long way away from that. We suffer what's called Friday-itis, where kids don't turn up to school on a Friday. And of course, that sort of permeates into the workforce. And if you look at the percentage of students attending less than 70% of the time, we've got an ethnic, we've got a social equality issue out there that we need to address. And you don't address these issues unless you're pumping a lot more money into those areas of society that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And unfortunately, that's Maori Pacifica. So, a lot of work still to do what we're also seeing around the globe at the moment is that there's tectonic shifts. Yeah, the world is just shifting as we speak. Yeah, we're looking at Donald Trump from night to night in regard to, for God's sake, what he said now, what's going on. But the story here is pretty simple. For the past 30 years, we've been in a global economic environment where what's called the commercial imperative, i.e. the economics of trade, has dominated the thought process. So global trade as a share of GDP was moving up. Yeah, everybody outsourced to China. The world became increasingly connected. That was a good news story for New Zealand. What we're now in is a world that's fracturing because economic security is now aligned with national security. Now, connect the dots here. The government has now got a commitment to take defence spending from 1.2 to 2% of GDP. Right? Now, that's going to cost this government $30 billion additional money over the next 10 years. And where that money's coming from is anybody's guess. But we're on board with where this sort of stuff is going. And it's security in 3 areas: security in food, security in energy, and security in technology. Yeah, because whoever owns the upland nodes of technology controls the chips, controls the computers, and the computers control the machines. And there is a battle royale going on at the moment between China and the United States in regard to technological advancement. But New Zealand is going to get caught up, and we're already getting caught up within huge tectonic structural shifts around the globe. I guess the good news story here about New Zealand is that at the end of the day, the world still needs to eat. And it's been interesting to see that when oil prices have come down, we've seen dairy prices hold up. Yeah, red meat prices are holding up really well as well. There's the rural sector in New Zealand outside of lamb and forestry is actually going pretty well. Yeah, that New Zealand dollar around 60 cents has been the icing on the cake, but we haven't seen the pressure across commodity prices that we're seeing in other countries around the globe. Now, if you have a look at Treasury's forecasts, they were an interesting set of forecasts, and every set of economic forecasts provides the economic base that our well-being is built on. What was interesting within these set of forecasts was I had a good old-fashioned chuckle because it was the rule of 3 plus 2. So it looks like what Treasury sort of looked at what's going on around the globe, what's going on locally, and sort of said, well, God, we're not sure. So 3% sounds a nice round number for GDP growth and 2% for inflation. So there you got the rule of 3 plus 2, and it's sort of like economic nirvana. Now, what does that mean in practice? What's the Treasury expecting for the labour market? And most economists, myself included, we don't think the unemployment rate has yet peaked because it's a lagging indicator. I think it'll get up to around 5.5. But you're going to see the unemployment rate start to come down in 2026 and 2027 towards 4%. We're in a period at the moment which is sort of cyclical weakness, where the power resides with the employers, which was a tectonic shift compared to what we saw over 2021, 22, 23, and probably halfway through 2024. The power was with the employees. That shifted at the end of 2024. The employers are still in the driving seat for 2025. I think the employees are going to get back in the driving seat in 2026, 2027 as growth picks up. But you've got to realise there is a structural shift here in regard to population ageing, and there's also structural shifts in regard to, the young are just leaving New Zealand. And we need to be investing in talent, and what we've done in New Zealand too little for too long a period is that we've relied on migration to build our talent base. And it's a short-term strategy. It's not a sustainable strategy. Now, if you look at the economic forecast, and look, I know there's a lot of numbers sort of here. If you look, fifth line from the bottom, GDP production measure, there you got the rule of 3. GDP growth 2.93, 2.9, 2.6. So basically flat as a pancake. Below that, you've got GDP per capita, which is population adjusted growth. Effectively a proxy for productivity growth. What the Treasury is assuming is that we get a lot of productivity growth back into the equation. I looked at that line and I thought, wow, because if we can get GDP per capita 1.4 to 8% over that 4-year period, we're going to be going bloody well. But that's going to take an awful lot of work in regard to getting the building blocks of productivity back in vogue. The other line that, the money line for any finance minister is what's called potential GDP. That is how fast the economy can grow sustainably through the combination of population growth and productivity. Now, that number used to be around 3%. It's now in the low 2s. That is the number that we need to get up. So while you can rip or pull temporary levers such as migration to get growth up, the real driver, the real story here is that New Zealand has got a structural problem with productivity. If you go back 10 years ago, productivity growth used to average 1.4, 1.3% per year. For the last decade, the average has been 0.3. And I was on radio yesterday, and the radio station was keen to sort of point the finger at the government. And I said, well, hang on. This is not just about the government lifting its game in regard to driving productivity growth. This is about the private sector embracing AI, technology, digitization. And if people get a little bit bored, go have a read of one of the chapters in the OECD Economic Survey of New Zealand 2022, where they had a good old-fashioned crack at New Zealand in regard to embracing AI, technology, digitization. We were slow. We were not fast uptakers of that sort of stuff, and we need to be faster uptakers. Now, if you look at the fiscal numbers, just draw your attention to it. A couple of things. There's a whole lot of different fiscal measures we look at. There's the OBGAL X, which strips out ACC. There's the OBGAL, which is just the operating balance, excluding gains and losses. Interesting to see within this measure, the situation does not improve until 2027. Between 2024 and 2026, the numbers actually deteriorate. What I saw within the budget yesterday was that a whole lot of the initiatives were front-loaded and all the savings were back-loaded. So it's a little bit like we call promise me economics. We're going to spend, we're going to provide you tax relief up front, but trust us, because in future budgets, we're going to rein things in. And the government in this year's budget managed to pull the old rabbit out of the hat. But if you look at the underlying numbers, so you look at the budget update, the blue line, within the budget update, the OBGAL X, which excludes ACC, or if you look at OBGAL as well, it deteriorates over the coming 12 months. And we cannot blame the economy for that, because the economy's turned the corner. So the reason we're deteriorating in the next 12 months is because of structural decisions by the government to pump money into this economy. So when the government says they're, charting a path back to surplus, it's right, but it's into the back half of the forecast period. It's not in the front half. So we have not seen the impact yet of fiscal tightening. The fiscal tightening is still around the corner, and government debt as a share of GDP or nominal is still rising over the projection period. It flattens out in the last 2 years. But of course, that flattening out is very dependent upon very tight budgets. If you look at the strategic story here for the Minister of Finance, Nicola Willis is in what's called the impossible trinity. You want to provide, if you can, some pro-growth initiatives via tax relief or investing in infrastructure. You want to return to surplus. You want to roll over that rise in debt trajectory, so you show your fiscal credentials, And then what you've also got is, the government sector is a money pit, and you just need to throw some money at health, education, law and order. Your teacher pay settlements are going to take money. I know within the budget, there's a whole lot of new initiative spending, and they wrap things up in these packages. But when you break it down, a lot of it is just to keep the wheels turning money. Now, you can be on one side of the triangle, you can't be on all three. And if I have a look at what we saw within the budget yesterday, it's very clear that the government is on the tax relief, infrastructure, go for growth, return to surplus, low debt side, as opposed to two of the other sides. And the big issue here is that what's going to be the ability, or how much can you run down or contain spending, because at some stage it's going to come back to bite you. But you're going back to you're pulling the old rabbit out of the hat. Within this budget, there's $6.8 billion worth of new initiatives. So new spending, $5 billion, 1.8 of tax changes, which is largely investment boost. And the rabbit out of the hat was pay equity savings of $2.8 billion. That's where they basically found the money. Without finding that money, this budget was sunk. Now, there's a whole lot of other redirected savings of around $2 billion as well. You've got the budget allowance of 1.3. But the biggest story here was that pay equity was basically redistributed to pay for investment boost, which is in $1.8 billion effective tax cut for firms to be investing in plant machinery, commercial buildings, that sort of stuff. So we can argue about the economics of that, but that's also going to have social implications in regard to how society starts to view it. Yeah, I went through yesterday as well what's called the summary of new initiatives, and just to give you a flavour of when you cut stuff, this is an example of some of the stuff that's been whacked. So housing and urban development, they lost 400 mil. Yeah, so a lot of the stuff is just the pipeline for KO. Yeah, science got reprioritised, that they lost 200 mil. And what goes on within government, because I've worked in Treasury in the 1990s, is that you knock money on the head over there, you repackage it, you put a different uniform on it, and you say this is new money and it's going into this fancy new initiative. And most of the time it's not new money, it's just repackaged money. And what we saw within the budget was an awful lot of examples of repackaged money. Yeah, and once again, this is why I called it the Peter versus Paul budget, or the Pauline versus Polly, because there was a whole lot of stuff that was just cancelled over here and redirected into another area over there. Now, the government has been really keen to promote their fiscal credentials, and they're clamping down and going from deficit to surplus, charting a path. We have not yet hit that turning point. Yeah, if you look at the forecast for OBGAL X, or the OBGAL, or what's called the structural balance, which removes the impact of the economic cycle, we're still seeing a deterioration in all those indicators this fiscal year, but we're going to see it in the next fiscal year as well. So once again, there's a whole lot of initiatives, and it's largely tax relief, that has been pushed into the economy in the near term, and all the savings are backloaded into 2026, 27, 28, 29, 29, 30. Yeah, so we have yet to see the impact of what's called fiscal consolidation and austerity. No, there's no austerity in this budget. Yeah, the austerity is going to be in the next two budgets. And the problem is the next budget, people might have worked out, is an election year. So what would be the odds of the 2026 budget being an austerity-based budget when you've got an election in the back half of the year? Now, one indicator I look at is what's called the fiscal stance. And it's just a proxy as to whether the economy is pumping more funding into this economy or stripping it out. And this just goes to illustrate that stuff is being front loaded. Yeah, so if you look at the fiscal stance in 2024, 2025, and 2026 is stimulatory. All the savings, or what we call promise me economics, is backloaded to 2027, 2028, 2029. Yeah, so we have not yet turned the corner or yet bitten the bullet in regard to what austerity, fiscal consolidation, getting the books back on track actually means, because things are being front loaded and savings are being backloaded. Now, this budget started off as a $2.4 billion budget allowance budget. By the time there were pre-commitments to health and everything else, there was not a lot of money to throw around the tin. But next year's budget, the government has said, is going to be another $2.4 billion budget. They've pre-committed $1.4 billion to health. They've pre-committed $100 million to defence. So the budget next year is a $900 million budget. That's all that's left. I got an email yesterday from someone at the Ministry of Education that just noted, we thought we did pretty well getting 300 million. And this is every year. So over 4 years, it adds up to about 1.1, 1.2 billion. I replied, I think you might have got stiffed. And the person replied, why is that? Well, 300 million divided by a $20 billion budget is 1.5%. 1.5% is below the rate of inflation. Your budget's just in real terms just been effectively cut. So you think you've done well, but health was the real winner within this budget. And what we're also going to see is the government's got what's called a capital allowance, and that capital allowance for next year has been set at 3.5. They've already allocated 1.6 billion to defence. Yeah, so you got 1.9 billion left to go. Yeah, so these numbers in next year's budget, the government is going to need another rabbit. They're going to need another $2 to $3 billion saving area. And the issue is, where's that going to come from? Is it going to come from ACC reform, ACC levies? Is it going to come from biting the bullet in regard to New Zealand superannuation? Or are we going to see more means testing? It was interesting to see within this budget, we saw hints of more means testing, which I think is a little bit of testing of the waters. And we're going to start to see a bit more of that. Now, if you look at who got what, and this is spending, what I think is really stark within this is the money that's been pumped into health compared to a whole lot of other sectors. Like, yeah, the health budget got banged up by $2 billion. Yeah, so they got a huge amount of money when you consider what the health budget is compared to law and order, education, defence. Yes, there was more money thrown at education. Tertiary basically got zero. Law and order got a bit, but if you look at law and order expenses, they're projected to decline beyond 2026, 2027. Yeah, so there's going to have to be money thrown at the next year's budget at law and order, education, defence. The unallocated contingencies, a lot of the savings that came through there was the pay equity stuff, and Social Security and welfare identified some savings as well. But there was a whole lot of repurposing that went on, but within that repurposing, health was the winner hands down. And it's a very expensive line item that needs a lot of money thrown at it. What goes on within within the books is that the government can hide an awful lot of stuff within capital spending. So if you look at the capital package they delivered, the capital package was $4 billion, but within the document, there was $1 billion worth of capital savings. And it looks like a lot of that capital savings came from knocking on the head a bit of the activity of KO. They raised the capital allowance from $3.625 billion to $4 billion for this year. But what they didn't say was that they lowered the capital allowance from 3.625 to 3.5 billion in future budgets. So there was a little bit of shaving, a little bit of tinkering. Transport and communication was the winner. And at face value, I got a bit excited by that because I thought it might have been a bit of roading stuff. No, it's got nothing to do with roading. It's got everything to do with rail. It was where the money is going. But what you tend to see within the capital allowance, you can shuffle things around an awful lot. And I'm going to be watching that capital allowance really closely, because what I saw after the GFC was the government of the day underfunded roading, and they also, the education capital budget just slowly disappeared. Per student capital expenditure declined between 2009 and 2012. And this is just one of the levers that the government can often use to tweak or try to provide themselves a little bit of what's called a fiscal buffer. I talked before about means testing. We were starting to see elements of this within this budget. So the KiwiSaver government subsidy, if you're earning what I'm earning or what Troy's earning, then guess what? You don't get the KiwiSaver subsidy. And to be fair, that's just. I don't have a problem with that sort of stuff as well, right? People like me should not get that KiwiSaver subsidy. 18, 19-year-olds, if your parents have got means and they're living on a benefit at home, guess what? Johnny or Jenny might not get the benefit anymore. And income testing, the first year of Best Start tax credit is here. Now, these are just illustrations, in my view, of where we're going to go, because means testing is going to, I think, be a lot more of a common feature. And as an economist, I don't have a problem with it. I'm a big believer in the welfare state is an essential part of New Zealand. I like it, but the welfare state's there for the needy. I do not believe in people double dipping with retirees that are taking the energy subsidy. If you got pretty good money or you got a big investment portfolio, we need to have more targeted expenditure at those that are most in need. Looking at tax, there are a few tax tweaks. The big one was investment boost. That's about a 1.8 billion. KiwiSaver default contribution changes are coming through as well. I agree with that, but there's no free lunch. If you're getting people, their default settings go from 3 to 4%, then that takes money out of people's pockets. If you take money out of people's pockets in the near term, you're going to see a weaker economy in regard to retail spending in the next 12 to 18 months, but you're going to see a better offer economy 5 to 10 years down the track, because that money is ultimately going to be invested for the long term. So there's a bit of Peter versus Paul stuff coming through there as well. There was a little bit of other tinkering, the screen production rebate, which I don't agree with. It's a subsidy that goes to a group, 600 million. There was also, and I need to dig it out, there was about 30 to 40 million dollars worth of tax relief to the tobacco industry, which I want to go dig that one out, because I just don't agree with that sort of stuff. And it was for vaping. It looks at face value, and I just think that's poorly targeted tax relief. What was interesting within the budget was not just what they said, but what they didn't say. So at last year's budget, there was a lot of talk within the economic and fiscal update about trade-offs, about it being hard to make the numbers stack up, about there wasn't a lot of money to go around, so it was going to be difficult, and there were going to be choices. And those choices and trade-offs were likely to become harder over time. Within the document this year, I didn't see that section or that wording. And I went up and I had a chat to Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, and I said, why'd you take that out? And he said, no real reason. And I said, well, put it back in, because we like that sort of stuff. That's what we need to hear, that it's not easy, that there are going to be winners and losers out of this. So, do your job, Treasury, and be very transparent about what those trade-offs are likely to be. Just putting the numbers out there and letting us interpret them is half the job. You have a little bit of commentary. You're the government's independent arbiter or advisor on what's going on financially. Yeah, I like what you were putting in. I don't like the fact that you've actually taken it out. Just a couple of little quirky things I'll draw your attention to. If you go back and have a look in 2020, New Zealand's superannuation expenditure was about 500 million above education funding. In the upcoming year, superannuation expenditure is going to be about $3.24 billion above education expenditure. What does that mean in practice? We're spending more money on the grey force at the expense of the workforce. And, you know, the epicenter of New Zealand's economic health starts with the kids of today, because they are tomorrow's entrepreneurs, they are tomorrow's workforce. You know, they are the movers and the shakers of where New Zealand is going to be, and we need to get education right. What I did like within the budget was that there's a lot more money that's being thrown into early childhood primary schools, and tertiary education didn't get any growth uplift. So there's a bit of redirected money that's really going into the early stages, early learning style initiatives, their special needs support for kids that are behind the eight ball. But we need to see a lot more of that. And as I said to this Ministry of Education official, you didn't do well, right? You might think you did well because you thought you would get nothing. But compared to health, you're behind the eight ball. The other thing is just be aware that what we see within the fiscal forecasts is that we tend to see this flatlining of funding beyond 2006. So the budget, apart from health, they give you a lot of money in the next 12 months, and then they flatline it. And it's just not credible. You know, we know there's going to need to be a lot more money entered into areas such as defence if we're going to meet the defence capability numbers. You know, law and order is going to need money. You know, education, other areas of government as well. And the big issue here is that how do you make that 2.4 budget initiative number, which is not 2.4, it's 900 million now because health has taken a big chunk of it. How do you make 900 million stack up across all the rest of government expenditure? So where do we stand on those? Look, this was a tough budget to deliver. We needed to see fiscal consolidation. The spending pressures galore in health. Defence needs money, law and order, you name it. Infrastructure, we've got deficits across the board. We've got to get this economy going with growth style initiatives. All in all, it wasn't a bad budget that was delivered, but bear in mind, it was very contingent on a rabbit being pulled out of the hat. But the big issue here is that that's one rabbit. This government is going to need a big rabbit every year for the next 3 to 4 years. And the issue is going to be, where do we find those rabbits? And at some stage, we're going to need to look at ACC. At some stage, we're going to need to look at New Zealand superannuation. I'm watching pretty closely at the moment just whether we're going to see some societal blowback. And what was effective in this budget, the financing of a tax cut for corporate New Zealand, come at the expense of pay equity claims. Caveat on the pay equity claims, the fact that the pay equity claims delivered a saving of $2.8 billion a year tells you that the pay equity claims were getting out of control. We were not comparing an apple with an apple. We were comparing sectors where we were comparing an apple with an orange. So something needed to change, but there is going to be blowback in regard to that. So watch this space. So I'll get rid of that and we can get into some questions.
Cam, amazing. Thank you very much. I actually don't know how I feel having you just told me that, whereas I absolutely knew how I felt last year having heard that one. So just a reminder, if people have got some questions down the bottom, there is a Q&A section. There's a couple of questions that we have already. So Cam, first question, what role do you see for public-private partnerships playing in the future around infrastructure investments, and what are the implications of that?
It's huge because the government doesn't have the balance sheet it used to have to fund all the stuff itself. Yeah, so government debt, the new normal for government debt is 40 to 50% of GDP. Yeah, so what does that mean in practice? We're going to need to have private sector money, whether that be offshore, onshore, to get involved in infrastructure, roads of national significance, security of energy supply. It's a no-brainer in regard to where we're going, because the balance sheet of the government just does not have the capacity. The balance sheet of the government could have more capacity if they recycled assets, i.e. sold some and reinvested the proceeds, but asset sales is not exactly one of those sort of things that get you a lot of votes.
Next question. Employers tend to include their KiwiSaver contribution into employees' packages. Does that mean that it is an employee? It will be, in fact, the employees that will be paying the additional employer contribution. So I think that's paying 3% going to 4%. But if you've got a total fixed remuneration, that means they might be paying on both sides.
Yeah, so once again, the devil was in the detail within the budget. There was a line that I saw that the working assumption that Treasury was using was that 80% of that employer contribution was basically going to be subsidised by wage negotiation.
Okay. Cam, I'd love your views on the $190 million for Social Investment Fund.
Well, we'll see what they do with their money, but this is a personal view as well. I think Andrew Coster is perfect for that role. He'll be really good in that area. I don't think he was the right person to be head of police, but I think he's got that social investment hat, and I think that organisation under his leadership will do really well. So it's not just about the money they've got, it's the initiatives and where that money actually goes. The devil's going to be in the detail. But yeah, things start at the top, and I think they've got the right person in that job to deliver results.
Yeah. If growth does not pick up as per hopeful forecast, what will that mean for the debt track, and how quickly can that deteriorate?
Well, we're going to be in trouble. So debt will be higher. I guess if you look at New Zealand's debt levels, though, we're heading to 45% of GDP. Now, to be fair, that is still world class. Yeah, we've still got low levels of debt. The hook to that is that what has been the expense, i.e. the impact of deferred, delayed, no investment in infrastructure in regard to the economic cost. Because you can have a low debt number, but if you're not investing in your economy, got the right infrastructure, then ultimately you're going to pay for that stuff down the track in the form of forsaken growth. And the issue for New Zealand at the moment is getting that balance an awful lot right. Yeah, we need to get productivity up. And what we're now paying the price for at the moment is the impact of, I think, not using our balance sheet over a 20 to 30 year period, because we just became too fixated with low levels of debt.
This might be a semi-related question, actually. Wondering what is in the budget for innovation, technology and digitisation, given the poor ranking from the OECD?
Oh, I need to go through some of the details in regard to it, but I noticed, science in general lost about 200 mil, and it got redirected. The issue is, what does that redirection look like? Who gets what? It's not just about money, it's about delivering results. Yeah, we need to be investing here in New Zealand, but we need to be investing with more discipline. Yeah, if we sit back and take an honest look about what's gone on for the last decade, so this is not just the previous government, it goes back a wee while, is that we have not been investing with discipline. I cannot emphasise the important role sufficiently at the moment of numbers, measuring results, accountability. Yeah, I'm on the board of Life Education New Zealand. We need to raise money. I'm in the CEO's ear time and time again about we need to measure impact. Because if we measure impact, we can go out to our funders and say, this is what you're getting in regard to a bang for your buck. Yeah, when the money is tight, money gets tougher to come in the door. The only way you get money in the door is to show that you're delivering impact. To deliver impact, you need to measure results.
Here's one from Ben. Regarding the unemployment rate, with a with a bit to rise and then come back and people leaving the country. How does this play out in your view over the next 12 months?
But I think the labour market, it's still going to be all power of the employer for another 12 months. But the long-term story here is that there's a structural shift that's going to the empower of the employee.
Quick question, it's a bit of a side one for this, but I don't know, and I know you'll have knowledge on it. What is your quick take on the Aussie economic conditions and employment market over there, Cam? If it's too hard to answer, don't worry. But I think there's a lot of people going, hey, we're losing people to Australia. But having just been there, I go, there feels like there's some, it's maybe not all is glittering. But I'd like your take on that.
No, Australia's still that sort of lucky country. Is everything shining in Australia? The answer is no. It costs you an absolute bomb to live there in the form of a house for a start. But your income levels are, depending on your sector, what you do, 20, 30, 40% higher. Right? So the attraction's pretty obvious if you're in your 20s, but be prepared for money to be going out the door as well in regard to living costs. Australia has got a real housing cost issue at the moment, and it's getting worse.
Here's a question. Great presentation. This question is not directed at you, but economists generally, generally, like anything, budgets can be interpreted in different ways. To what extent do you think an economist's political views can influence the commentary people often hear?
Oh, I don't know. If I go back to slide 1, I put it there, I'm a straight shooter.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's open season on the politicians. I've got no problem providing my economic expertise to the Labor Party or the National Party, any political party that asks me to come in and give them a bit of an update in regard to what's going on. I'll give them a pretty frank and honest assessment about what's going on. One of the best prime ministers and finance ministers I've seen in New Zealand was Helen Clark and Michael Cullen. But I used to have some ding-dongs with them in regard to some of the economic policies they brought in. So the spade's still a spade. There's been some articles I've written on Business Desk that I know have not gone down well within the current finance minister's office.
Next question. Fiscal management, tax spending and debt seems to have an economic impact in bands. Debt at 40% of GDP seems pretty significant and not reducing significantly. What macroeconomic effects do you see this having over time?
Let's sit back and think about, New Zealand's got a AA plus credit rating. Debt's gone from 20% of GDP to 40%. Is the world caved in? Is our credit rating been nudged down? The answer is no. Do I think our credit rating is going to get nudged down in the next 12 months? The answer is yes. What will that mean for interest rate costs? The answer is bugger all. AA plus to AA is a margin of excellence tweak. I think the important issue here is more likely what's going on around the globe. At the end of the day, the United States determines the global cost of capital. And what we're seeing at the moment is that people are starting to get a little bit nervous about the trajectory for US debt. And if the world gets nervous about the trajectory for the United States debt, that has lifted a US 10-year bond. So a US 10-year bond is up around 4.6%. That's flowed through to New Zealand 5, 10-year bonds. So we're a little bit higher than what we perhaps would have otherwise been. But what we're seeing around the world at the moment is that the return of what's called term premiums, where you want a little bit more of a risk premium for holding a 10-year bond over a 1 of a 2-year bond. And there's a few reasons for it: inflation, uncertainty, but also that, people are starting to get a little bit more concerned about fiscal risks. The United States, Japan's debt position as well. And if the world gets nervous, that impacts New Zealand. So it's the indirect channel that I think is going to hit New Zealand more by what's happening in other countries than the direct channel, i.e. what our debt levels are.
For the average Joe and Josephine, what should we do and what does this mean? Living costs have gone up, unemployment rates are going up before it goes back down. No increase in salary, more money to KiwiSaver. So am I worse off?
Well, when the government goes from deficit to surplus, the mechanism by which they do that is that they take more money out of people's pockets than what they give you back. Now, some parts of society might still win, but most of society is going to lose. That's what fiscal consolidation is all about. So it doesn't matter whether you look at local authorities, because local authorities have got deficits. So what are local authorities doing? They're pushing up rates by more than 10%. Your income's not going to be going up by 10%. So we're seeing the same story here across central government and local government, where they're going to be taking more money out of your pockets relative to the wage bill. Sorry, relative to incomes. And it's just a wealth distribution mechanism from your private sector households to central local government.
If I get this question right, what allowance has the budget made for externally driven interest rate changes, i.e. from US Treasury bills variations or US T-bill variations, and the resulting interest rate increases offshore or other factors?
So if you look at the forecast, they've got US 10-year, New Zealand 10-year bond at 4.3%. Yeah, so that gives you, I can't remember what the exact interest rate cost is, but if you look at where a New Zealand 10-year bond is trading at the moment, I think off the top of my head, it's up around 4.7. So we're about 10% higher than what their forecast track is. Now, could we go down to 4.3? The answer is yes. I think given the structural shifts we're seeing around the globe, when the Treasury pulls together their half-year economic and fiscal update, I think their 10-year bond forecast numbers and their other interest rate forecast numbers will be a little bit higher. What does that mean in practice? I think the interest rate cost bill that's within Treasury's forecast at the moment is probably around 5% light, or around 500 million light on what we're likely to see when we get the next set of forecasts, because the cost of capital has moved up around the globe, but Treasury's forecasts were finalised in early April.
In your opinion, will the Reserve Bank help or hinder?
Well, they can help, but yeah, what the Reserve Bank gives us is a bit of a steroid injection. Yeah, they can get us up into the party zone for a 24, 36-month period by just cutting interest rates and firing the retail sector up and firing the housing market. But ultimately, real wealth creation, living standards, your well-being, is determined by potential growth, which is determined by productivity in combination with productivity growth, labour and capital, in combination with population growth. And that's the line that we need to be focused on. Yes, we can reach for the party pill. The Reserve Bank can help us out when we're in a time of weakness, which is what they're doing, so the OCRs come down. But ultimately, substance to your life needs to come from this productivity story.
What does the budget mean for the job market?
Oh, the budget says at the moment, right, so there's a couple of different ways, right? So forget about the budget. What the budget has said is that, look, the economy is going to get back on track. Yeah, we're going back towards 3% growth, get back towards 3% growth. Unemployment starts to come back down in 2026, 2027. But if you look at the role of fiscal policy driving that growth, fiscal policy is expansionary in the upcoming 12 months, but fiscal policy will be contractionary the 3 years after that. What does that mean in practice? The government is taking money out of the economy relative to what they're putting back in. Yeah, so there'll be some parts of New Zealand, your Aucklands, your Waikatos, your Canterburys, rural heartland down in Canterbury, that sort of stuff, South Canterbury, they're going to be going pretty well. Wellington, if you're going from deficit to surplus, Wellington is going to be pretty tough for a few more years, because that's what fiscal consolidation is about. Fiscal consolidation is about taking more money out of society than what you're pumping back in. We have not reached that period yet where we're into that zone. We're given the belief that we're in that zone. The economic numbers tell us we're not in that zone yet.
Any thoughts on where other taxable income to meet future obligations could come from, especially capital gains?
Well, I think that the budget, so not the budget, but the the next election, one of the key defining issues will be a good old-fashioned debate about tax. You know, the opposition political party is going to have to position themselves on tax, because they're talking a big game about what the government is cancelling. But I see Hipkins yesterday didn't exactly say he was going to reinstall the pay equity claims. Well, so where's the money going to come from? Yeah, it's going to have to come from tax. Yeah, so if I go back to my impossible trinity, if you remember the impossible trinity, the bottom side of the triangle, is where the Labor Party is going to sit, or try to sit.
From Gavin, do you believe Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand has the capability to be able to allocate such significant increase in budget responsibly, given recent poor performance in health and commissioning spend?
Well, I'm not up with the sort of ins and outs, but the recent performance will make you a bit suspicious. Yeah, when I see a $2 billion uplift, directed at a sector, you need, well, you want assurance that there's the capability to deliver on it. Proof will be in the pudding of that. Yeah, I go back to that mantra, that phrase I've been using. If we're spending money, we need to be spending money with a lot more discipline than what we have been for the past decade.
Here's a classic New Zealand question, which I liked. What do you think will happen in the housing market? Is it a good time to buy?
If you're buying and selling, you're in the same market, aren't you? So it doesn't really matter. I just sold a place.
Any comments on social welfare spending? Child poverty, homelessness impacts are all pretty depressing. What will the increase in health funding actually achieve from what you saw?
It was interesting, and it wasn't picked up, and I might go have another look at it, but the child poverty report showed a deterioration. And we're a long way away from achieving, getting anywhere near where the targets are. I'm a big believer in what's called the circular economy between economic and social objectives. What I don't like across New Zealand is that we ping pong from a social agenda to an economic agenda. So one side of the political fence spends a lot of money and doesn't get an awful lot of economic outcomes, and the other side of the fence focuses on economic outcomes, and we don't get social outcomes, and we just get disequilibrium, and we play ping pong from both sides of the economic ledger, from election cycle to election cycle. We need to break, or we need to get that circularity up and running. Social investment's the right approach. I hope it gets a lot more money, and I hope Andrew Costa goes really well in that role.
Nice. We've got 2 minutes to go, so we might have one more question, then I might get you to kind of just do a final comment. Given the medium to long-term economic predictions, what advice would you be giving to young New Zealanders?
Well, I've got 2 kids, right? So I can give you what I tell them as a parent, and I just get the kids focused on the basics. One of the things that I'm doing with my kids at the moment is I don't like to wrap my kids too much in cotton wool. I think there's too much of that in New Zealand, and there's some obvious reasons as to why we do it. But if you wrap your kids too much in cotton wool, how do they learn to take risk? And ultimately, life is about taking a bit of risk if you want to get forward. The other thing I tell my kids is just the importance of giving back. Just be good bloody citizens. Knuckle down. The schooling years are the best years of your life. But when you're in school, you don't realise that. And then you get out and work, and you think, oh, God, this is bloody hell, school's pretty goddamn good. You get there and have some fun, enjoy it, make the good connections. My oldest daughter's off to Stanford in September. And that's one hell of an opportunity for her to thrive, make connections, that sort of stuff. I've got another daughter at Wanganui Collegiate, and she's just loving the place. Why? It's got some old school values, and I respect that. I've got a lot of time for for that.
Cam, thank you very much. Everyone, it's 9 o'clock. I've really appreciated today. I really hope people have taken something out of today. We will record this. We will send this out. We'll try and take some commentary and feed that back out as well. But, you know, for everyone here, if you need anything, you know, just on behalf of anyone, either whether you're looking for employment, you are worried, there is a whole lot of information sitting on the Inside Recruitment website. We've just got a series coming out around how the candidate market is feeling at the moment. So please jump into Inside Recruitment. You'll see a 6-part series of a survey we've just completed. And yeah, we do wish everyone the best. And Cam, thanks again. Kia ora. Thanks all. Have a great day.